This is basic HTML and CSS part 1, again with myself and Jerry Humphrey.
Hi, everyone.
The first part of this is what in the world is HTML anyway? Well, it stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Many of you probably already knew that, but if you didn't, that's what the specific HTML is. The most important element out of that definition is the word markup. You can see in the second bullet point, I've just included a little note that it is a markup language and not a coding language. That may make no sense to you whatsoever, but it will as we go on through today. Basically, the big difference between a markup language and a coding language is the markup language isn't dynamic. It's not communicating with databases. It's not communicating, with scripts itself. The HTML isn't. It's not dynamic. It's not, it's not going to output, today's, current date and time, etc. All of that stuff requires some type of a coding or scripting language. Coding languages, something like PHP or Perl. Scripting languages like JavaScript. So just understand that it is a markup language. It's not really a coding or a programming language. You'll understand what that means as we go on. Its primary function is to describe or define your web page's content. It does affect to some degree the actual styling of the content, but that's not its primary function. It's really meant to describe or define the content. By that I mean it helps the browser and also search engines get a better understanding as to the type of content you're presenting them, and you'll understand that as we go along more as well. So basic HTML definitions. HTML is comprised of what's referred to as tags. You can see here there's some example tags, HTML, H1, P, and then B. You'll also note that each tag is wrapped in these angle brackets, or also the less than and greater than sign if you prefer that. And you can see how that's done. Each tag is wrapped exactly as you're looking at it. Basically an angle bracket or a less than sign to the left and a greater than sign to the right of it. So whenever you see content like this wrapped in these angle brackets, these are actual HTML tags. The next thing that you need to understand is what an HTML element is. The element contains what's referred to as a starting or an opening tag, this P tag here to the left I'm highlighting with my cursor, and a closing or ending tag. They're the same. Starting and opening tags refer to the same thing, and closing and or ending tags refer to the same thing. You'll note that the ending tags are nearly identical to the opening with one difference, and that is the / that precedes the same tag. So in this case, this is a paragraph, which is what the lowercase p is for. This says to start treating this content, the content that comes next, as a paragraph, a new paragraph, and this closing tag says, okay, I'm done. You can stop treating content as a paragraph with the / p. The element then comprises the opening tag all the way through to the closing tag. This entire bit, to include the content, is an HTML element. The content between the tags is referred to as the element content. Pretty simple. This is the content that's actually going to get displayed to the visitor, the browser, when they look at your web pages. They're not going to see the P with the angle brackets. They're only going to see the content that is between the tags. All right, the next definition you need to understand is called an HTML attribute. An attribute is something that basically allows you to add extra information that's relevant to a particular tag. Now, there are a variety of HTML attributes available to you, but note a couple things. They are specific to the tag. So over here you have alt equals image, and you probably have seen this and know what this is, but it's alternate text. This ALT equals, in quotations, the word image. This basically says if for some reason the browser is not capable of displaying the image, and I see that I have a problem with my HTML here. That's really good of me. This URL should be wrapped in a quotation mark, and I really apologize for that. But it says, look, try to display the image that's over here at this URL. Of course, this doesn't even go to a full image either. But understand that if I was calling out the image properly here in the source, it would try to display it to the visitor. And if it could not for some reason, it would display this text, alt equals image. The alt equals image portion of this is the attribute. So just understand that, again, each tag has the ability to have attributes, or most tags do at least, but that the attributes are specific to the tag itself, in this case IMG. The IMG portion over here is the actual tag, short for image. SRC is short for the source, meaning where am I supposed to get this image from? And then again, you have this additional attribute, alt equals, and then quotation marks image. Note that attributes, all of the attributes are used exactly this way. There's the attribute itself, the equal sign, and then the value for the attribute in quotation marks. It also will work with single quotes, basically the apostrophe, but it is preferable, in my opinion, to keep it consistent and to use quotation marks for all of your attribute content. So I would suggest that you do it this way with the attribute equals and then the content in quotation marks. Also note a couple of other things. In HTML, and things have become different. HTML, even HTML by itself, most tags had to be opened and closed. Again, going back to the understanding that this is the opening paragraph tag and this is the closing paragraph tag. With images, images are referred to as empty elements. By that I mean, if you look up here with the paragraph again, you'll note that there's content between the opening and the closing tag. With the image tag and a few others that are referred to as empty elements, there's no content between an open and a closing tag. This was allowed in standard HTML, but it's not allowed in XHTML or HTML5. They require an opening and a closing tag for every single tag that you're going to use in your document. So the way that they've done this now is they've included at the very end the /, similar to the way you see it up here, before the angle bracket. This is referred to as a self-closed element. It's opened and closed inside of the same tag. And images are one, line breaks, the BR tag is another, and those are the two most commons, although there are others as well. So I think that's it for this particular slide. Here is the basic HTML framework, meaning the absolute minimum that you would need in order to cause a web page to be created. So you can see that it starts up here in angle brackets with HTML, basically just telling the browser, hey, this document that you're about to display to visitors is an HTML web page. Next is the head tag, and you can see that the head tag is opened here, and then on line 5 the head tag is closed here. Again, remembering that each tag has to be opened and then subsequently closed. Inside of the head tag we have the title tag, the opening and the closing behind it, and inside of the element again is the element content. In this case it says title of document. What you need to know about the head area of a page is that most of the time it doesn't actually output any content. It's information for the browser in regards to how the page works, but it's not actually outputted to the visitor, except for a few instances, the title tag being one of them. The browser is going to output this information into the browser bar. We'll see that as we test this page. most search engines are also going to use this information when creating your search engine listings. So it's important that you use well-written information that's relatively succinct or short, and of course very, very tailored to your content if you want to improve your SEO. I should also make a quick SEO mention. If you want to improve SEO of your websites, each title should be completely unique for every page of your site. If you ever see a website that has the same exact title tag information across every page of it, you're dealing with someone that had no understanding of SEO whatsoever. So the title document, the title tag content should be specific to the content found on the page, and it should be unique to that page. That's just a quick aside. So inside of the head area, you'll notice that, again, the opening tag is on line 3, as you can see here. The title tag is opened and closed on line 4, and then we've closed the head section on line 5. Just kind of note the structure of things. Down here on line 7, we have the opening body tag, and on line 9, the closing body tag. The content that goes between the body tag is the main content for the web page and what is going to be displayed to visitors when they call up your web page in their browser. So that's what to note in regards to the body tag. And then lastly is the closing HTML tag, and this basically tells the browser that this web page is done. The content for this page is complete. So that is the absolute bare bones basic HTML framework, and we're going to obviously build on this as we go through the HTML and CSS training. So with that, let's just jump out of PowerPoint and go create our very first test page. I'm going to start by using nothing more than Notepad because number one, I want to show you that it can be done with Notepad, but additionally, for anyone who is using Notepad to go through this course, I do want you to know there's a couple of very small selections or preferences you're going to want to make note of. Before we do that, though, I would say, or suggest rather, that each new website or web page that you create, you start by creating a new directory or folder for it to contain all of the individual files, the images, the CSS as we go along, etc. So I'm going to open up just my test area here. The first thing I'm going to do is just create a new folder. Depending upon which version browser you have, or operating system rather, you might just click new folder. You might need to right click and choose new folder, etc. Regardless, create a new folder and then give it a name, and oops, live will work, but I wanted to cause that to be this. So I'm just going to name it live website. Typically, just as a quick aside, I typically name them with the actual domain name. So if I was putting this on a particular website over at yourdomain.com, I would generally label it yourdomain-com. That's just me. So inside of this new folder, we'll put our website or web page elements and keep everything basically nice and organized in one area. So I'm going to open up Notepad, and you'll see I've also basically just pre-prepared some sample text. We'll just take a quick peek at it. You'll see that most of this is what's referred to as lorem ipsum text, basically just kind of a random text based in Latin, I believe. Lorem ipsum text is used by web developers a lot, just as placeholder text, because primarily it's not the web developer's function to be, creating the content. That's typically either the client's responsibility, or they may hire a writer to provide content. It's not to say that you can't provide content for your clients. If you do, I would really recommend that you charge additionally and handsomely for that, but you'll have to make that determination. In addition to the lorem ipsum text, the placeholder text, I've just input up here sample heading number 1, sample heading number 2, sample heading number 3, so we can kind of get an idea as to how this works. In addition, you'll notice that there's space above and below each one of these text blocks to represent an individual paragraph. So that would be paragraph number 1, paragraph number 2, etc. So with this text just by itself, without any basically doing anything to the core text, I'm just going to add the basic HTML structure above it, and then we'll come back and paste this content into the body tag. So here's what I mean. I'm going to type the HTML open tag, and one way to do this, especially if you're new, is to immediately type the closing tag right behind it. This will help you remember to make sure that you have both. If you forget closing tags, you will frequently run into problems. So it makes it easy to type the opening and the closing and then give yourself some space between them. Next is going to come the head tag, and I'm going to do the same exact thing. I'm going to type the opening, making sure that it's right, and the closing tag. Wow. And I'm going to put a little space between. That's enough. Down here, I'm going to type the body tag, and then I'm going to, just put a little space between, and up in the head, I'm also going to add the title. And we'll just give it content of live web page so you can see how that responds in the browser. So again, going back with the understanding, this is the basic framework that we just talked about. We've got an opening HTML and a closing HTML, and this is the correct order for them. We have a head area that's opened and closed with a title tag that's opened and closed between it. And then we've got the body section open and closed here with the understanding that what goes between it is the main content for the page. And that's it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just simply copy, or cut rather, this content out of here, and I'm going to paste it in between the body tags. Okay, so with that, we've created our first web page. We haven't used any tags around this text, though, whatsoever, and I'm doing that on purpose. I want you to see basically what happens in the browser. This extra space really doesn't matter, but I'll go ahead and get rid of a lot of it. Okay, so we've got our first web page. I'm going to go ahead and save it. And here's what I want you to pay attention to. If you happen to be using Notepad, when you go to save it, doing a save as, you'll notice right here the default type says save as type is a .txt. You don't want that. This needs to be a .html file. And I guess I should make mention real quick the difference between .htm and .html. You may have seen some web pages out there as index.htm or webpage.htm, and others out there as webpage.html. You can use either. From a technical standpoint, neither is either correct or wrong. That said, I will tell you that my personal preference is to use .html and to use it exclusively. It's more recognized by most people. In addition to that, I think the only thing that I would say that I would characterize as wrong is to mix them. You really don't want to create, an index page with index.htm and then have an internal page be, joesplumbing.html. That's the only thing I would say. I would consider that wrong, even though both will work. So when you go to save your page, you want to name it in .html, and leaving the default thing here will not allow you to do that. So you need to do one of two things. You need to either switch this to all files by clicking the drop down and selecting all files, if that's the option that you have to you. Sometimes you may see that you have the ability to select individual file types. Just switching this to all files will allow this to work. I'm going to save this now. We'll navigate to where we're going to save it in the live website folder that we created. And I'm going to name it index.html. The .html in lowercase, that's important. So just whatever the page name is, .html. You likely already know, but the index page is what the browser is looking for initially. It's basically represents the home page or the main page for a particular either a website or a directory of a website. Down here under encoding, you may or may not have this depending upon your operating system. This is a Windows 7 machine, but in encoding, I have the ability to select different encoding types. And if you have the ability to, typically you want to select for web work the UTF-8 encoding. This is what's referred to as the character set. If you're using a Windows XP machine, I'm not certain whether the encoding is available to you or not. What's that, Jerry?
Vista and after.
Okay, so Vista and 7 have the new encoding built into Notepad, and previous versions of Windows do not. So we've saved it as index.html. Again, we changed it to all files. We click Save. Okay, we have created our first web page. Here's what's cool about HTML and CSS as far as just testing and playing around with stuff. Because we're not using like PHP code, you can view this in a browser without having to have a web account, without having to do any FTP, and that's what we're going to do during today's session. We're not going to have to mess with any of that stuff. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and close this. We'll open up the folder itself, and you'll see inside of Live Website now we have this index page, and if I were to expand it over here, you'll see that for me it's telling me that the type of document is a Firefox HTML document, and it's telling me that because we've saved it as a .html file. Double-clicking it will bring up our first web page. Beautiful, isn't it? Note up here in the file path that it is basically choosing the file path from our local machine. This is what's referred to as local development. We'll get more into this later as far as developing web pages locally, but again, this works just fine if you're testing HTML and CSS web pages. You can do so without having to have a hosting account live. So it's coming from my computer. It's not something that I've uploaded to an actual server. Okay. Well, what happened? We had this nicely formatted text over here. Sample heading 1 was on a line, and we had these nice paragraphs, and we had space in between. And now basically what we got is this mess. It's basically filling the full width of the browser. That's one thing to pay attention to. Nothing is sitting on its own line. There's no separation between headings and paragraphs, and everything basically is just all jumbled together. This is specifically the reason why I didn't add any tags, so you can kind of see how this thing is built. Let me stop for just a second. My wife and I, we both started basically in the design area creating design work for print, either lithographic printing or maybe screen printing and a few different types of others, but primarily print work. And it's really easy to control how things are displayed in print because if you're printing flyers, if the printer's doing its job and it prints 1,000 flyers, when you hand those flyers out, every single person is seeing your design the exact same way. When we moved into web work, it was very frustrating, especially at first, because that was no longer the case. There are other things outside of your control that are controlling the actual display of your content to your visitors. And one of the first things, and the thing I want to point out here is that the browser themselves has what's called a browser style sheet. So you'll notice a couple things. You might think, well, there's no style here, but there actually is. Number one, note that the text is a certain size. All right? We haven't used any HTML tags at this point, but the browser's making a particular judgment call on what size to display the text. Also note that it's black. It's not blue or red or something else. Also note the font style, the font type. It is a serif font, meaning it has the little extra little lines that come out and jetty out of each individual letter. So the browser then is controlling things even though we haven't defined it that way. Also note that there's a little bit of space above the text and to the left of the text. And you'll see this here a little bit more obviously when we style this in just a minute. But the browser is making some judgment calls, and it's styling things even though we haven't asked it necessarily to do anything. All right, so let's move into the next kind of session and pick this up a little bit. I'm going to copy everything that we just did out of here. Just wanted to show you that it could in fact be done inside of Notepad. I'm going to open up Edit Plus, my preferred text editor, and I'm going to just do File, New, Normal Text, and I'm going to paste the content in from there. And I've increased the font size in Edit Plus, so hopefully you can see this a little bit better. So here we have the nicely formatted text again, and we're going to go ahead and start styling it. Well, this says it's a heading 1. There are 6 levels of headings, H1 all the way through H6. So since this is a heading 1, I'm going to wrap this in H1 tags. Again, an opening and a closing, telling the browser to style this text as a H1 heading and then stop. You know, don't style anything else that way, just this. Same thing with style 2, jump down here, and then style 3, which is below it. Again, the closing tags, after the angle bracket, it has the / before you repeat the tag. And then lastly, the H3. Okay, and I'll go ahead and save this document. Let's see here. Actually, we might need to close this out of Notepad because I want to overwrite this. Let's go here. Put it in the same folder, and we will name this. As index, and I just selected HTML out of Edit Plus, and I'm also going to do the same thing and choose the UTF-8 encoding and save that. It says it's already exists. Do I want to replace it? And I do. Okay, so we've styled the headings. We still haven't styled the paragraphs. Again, the paragraph tag is just simply a lowercase p. One of the cool things about Edit Plus, just to make a quick note, is that they have this clip text box over here that you can activate. And right now we have HTML 4.01, the specific type of HTML activated, and you can see all of these tags are available to me. So if I want to insert a paragraph tag right here, I can just double click on the P, and you'll see that it outputs right there. And for some of them, it'll actually create both the opening and the closing tag. We'll see that in a little bit. But for the moment, I'm just going to use it to quickly speed that process up. And then to put the closing paragraph tags behind it, I'm just going to type it once. I'm going to copy it and then just do a quick paste. So again, each paragraph needs its own opening and closing to let the browser know where each paragraph starts and stops. All right. Maybe point out something else. You'll notice that the Edit Plus put a space here, and on that last one it didn't. And it honestly doesn't matter. HTML will completely disregard the spacing that comes before or after the tag. So this will be just as left aligned as the paragraph above it. So we've saved that. I'll go ahead and reduce Edit Plus. We still have the page live. It's still in the exact same position on our computer. So all I need to do is click refresh, and we'll see the content change. Okay, so we've got the content to change now. It no longer looks quite as ugly, but it's still not attractive. So here's some of the things to note, though. Note how the headings are styled by the browser. We haven't used any CSS at this point. Just simply by the use of the heading 1 tag around the top text, it's this large, again being controlled by the browser style sheet. The heading 2 is larger than the regular body text, but it's not quite as big as the heading 1. Similarly with heading 3. Also note that they are bolded. So just note, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at is if you don't specifically style something, the browser is going to make determinations for you. Also note that the headings are still a serif type font. Again, they have the little extra bits that stick out of each letter. It's not using a sans serif font like Arial or Helvetica. In order to do that kind of thing, you have to basically define it through CSS. Let me take a quick look at my notes and see where I'm at. Okay, so basically right now all we have is 3 different levels of headings. Again, there are 6. You can actually go H4, H5, and H6 as well, and they would get smaller and smaller as defined by the browser. Again, all of the font colors are black. All the font styles are a serif font. So one other thing to note is the spacing that's coming above and below each one of these elements. Each one of the elements that we have currently on this page, or tags rather, are referred to as block level tags. So a H1 tag is a block level tag, as is the paragraph tag. Well, what does that mean? It means that when the browser sees a block level tag, like the headings or your paragraphs or many others, it says to the browser, put a hard return after it and put space, in this case margin, above and below the tag. So the reason why the paragraph here starts on a new line rather than flowing right behind sample heading number 1 is because this tag here, H1 tag, is a block level element. Again, it tells the browser to do 2 things. Immediately put a hard return after the closing tag of the block level element, and to put some spacing, in this case margin, above and beneath it. The same thing happens with the paragraph tag. You can see that until the paragraph finished, it was keeping it in this kind of spacing here, just single line spacing. But once it finished, once it found that closing paragraph tag, which we can't see because, again, the tags aren't output to visitors, but it knew, okay, this is the closing tag for a block level element, and as a result, I'm supposed to put a hard return and add some extra space. So just understand that that's what that means. If we add an inline level element, and we'll do that in a little bit, like a text link, an inline level element will not cause hard line breaks, nor will they cause extra space above and beneath them. They basically just flow with the content that's currently that currently surrounds it, rather. So that's what I wanted to point out there. Let's go grab some new code and take a look at some other new tags and kind of how they work, and we'll mention those. So there's a number of really good websites out there for web developers. I'll just mention 2. This one over here is Lipsum, lipsum.com, lipsum.com, a good place to get some lorem ipsum text for your websites if you want to use some placeholder text. You can either just grab text right from here, or you can use the generator down here that actually generates a certain number of paragraphs, etc. Just a kind of a cool little free website that you can use in your web development. The other one that I use quite frequently is similar, but a little bit different. It is html-ipsum.com. So HTML ipsum, instead of just providing you with lorem ipsum text raw, they actually have a number of examples that are already wrapped in paragraph, or I'm sorry, in HTML tags. So if I wanted to grab this long paragraph, you would see that it's lorem ipsum text, but it's wrapped with the paragraph tag at the beginning and of course also at the end. If you wanted, shorter paragraphs, you could grab that, sentences, bulleted lists, ordered lists that have number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 behind them, etc. And then of course over here is called the kitchen sink, a little bit of everything. So we're going to go ahead and grab the kitchen sink, put it in our web page, and start discussing it. So I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom and grab the kitchen sink. Again, this already contains all of the HTML, so it's good for testing and training, and of course it's also good to help me speed up this process. I'm going to get rid of all of our default text that we have here. I'm going to put a space from the body just so I can make sure that I don't touch it. I'm going to basically just replace the content that we had initially, and I'm going to paste the new text that we got basically from htmlipsum.com. All right, with that saved, we'll refresh in the browser and we'll see some new styling. So this is an H1, and we'll go back and look at the code here in just a second. Oh, this is showing up. The HTML Ipsum presents is H1 text. It's a heading 1. And down here we have some new stuff. We have some bolded text. Over here I see we have some text that's italicized. Here we have some text that is a different font style. It's called a monotype font or a monospace font, kind of like Courier. We have a text link. We've got a heading 2. This is a ordered list. By that I mean it's numerical. They could also be alphabetical, but ordered lists have a particular chronology, top to bottom, in this case 1, 2. This text here, you can see that it's got an additional bit of space to the left. It's also got additional bit of space to the right. This is, in HTML speak, this is a block quote, meaning that you are going to quote somebody, and using the block quote tag will cause this to happen. It causes extra space to show up on the left and right. A heading level 3, a new list, but this time it's not an ordered list, it's a bulleted list, what's referred to as a unordered list. And lastly, we have some computer code. In this case, it's a piece of CSS. We'll take a closer look at this because there's two things going on with it, or basically two tags that are controlling how it's displayed. The first tag that's controlling it is called code, C-O-D-E, and the code tag tells it to output in this specific monotype or monospace font, like Courier. And the other tag is the pre tag, P-R-E, which is short for pre-formatted, and it's allowing the text to stay exactly as it was input in the HTML. I'll show you that here in just a second. Here's a couple things I want you to know. Certain things are being styled. Again, this page has no CSS styling to it whatsoever. It's exactly as we had it. But still we have, larger text up here because this is an H1. We also have a text link, and you'll notice that it's blue and underlined. This is the browser default setting for a text link. So if you don't add any specific CSS to it, just know that this is what you're going to get. This is going to be the result. Okay, so we'll jump back over to Edit Plus and take a look at the individual HTML that's building the page. Again, very simply, we have an H1 wrapped around the HTML Ipsum presents text. Next, we have another block level element, or block level tag, paragraph tag. Here's our first new one, the strong tag. You can see that the strong tag is opened here and it's closed here. So what this is telling the browser is to consider the content between the open and close tags and make it stronger than the rest of the text. Now, there might be some debate even on this call in regards to what you should or shouldn't be using in regards to trying to do this, but this is not really the tag that was created to cause text to be bold. The tag that's still valid and can be used to cause text to be bold is the B tag. So you could get rid of this altogether and simply have just the B tag opened and closed. And I'll save this page. We'll go back just for a second, take a quick peek, and you'll notice that this text right here isn't going to change at all. It didn't. It's still bolded. So the question then is, well, why would you use, strong then? A lot of web designers have gotten into the habit of using strong whenever they're trying to bold text, and it's really just a habit. The reality to that is that the browser is making the definition or the determination of what to do or how to style any text that is basically marked up, which is what we're doing. We're marking up text, saying, hey, this text right here, cause it to be bold. I'm marking it up with these tags. So with the strong tag usage, the browser is currently deciding to cause that text to be bold. However, in the future, if they decided to change and say, you know what, no longer are we going to make strong text bold, we're going to make it, red, then using strong on your web pages by itself would cause all of your text to automatically change to red. You're being controlled basically by the browser, whereas the B tag is specific to HTML to do nothing more than bold text. So that's just what I want to point out there.
There's one slight thing, just to get slightly off topic. Bold on screen readers is typically spoken louder. It's supposed to stress, where strong is used to make something visually stand out. That's why they still have both. So it's a semantic type thing. So.
Right. So basically what I'm saying is both will cause the text currently to be bold in most modern browsers, but just so you know, the B tag is really specific to bolding text. The strong tag is used, like Jerry said, for other purposes. Probably most of you may not have even seen a screen reader, basically a device that actually is reading content aloud. It's primarily used for those who have disabilities, but that is one of the reasons, and Jerry brings up a good point, basically, is when we talk about HTML tags and HTML itself being used to define content, that's what it basically means. It's using the proper tag for the proper type of content, and we'll get into that a little bit more as we go on through this exercise. So the next tag is very similar to that, is this one, the EM, or emphasis tag. This is causing this text to be italicized by the browser, but again, it's not really the right tag. The right tag for italicizing in HTML is just simply an I. So inputting the I tag around this text will continue to keep it as italicized, but just note that you will very frequently see EM used, which in this case stands for, again, emphasis. And right now, the modern browsers, if they see content wrapped in the EM tag, they currently cause it to be italicized. Again, that's just the way it is. Yeah, Jerry.
Yeah, italics is typically used for style, where you're trying to do a style of a magazine article title, or Strunk and White says you should italicize magazine articles, where M is designed to, again, make something stand out very much along the lines of bold, but instead of being bolded, it's italicized.
Yeah, it's
you can use them interchangeably. Somebody asked, hey, what if you put bold around strong? What happens? They just kind of, it doesn't cancel each other out, but it doesn't do anything. So it doesn't make it stronger or bolder.
Right. It would be improper to do so, just FYI. So the next tag that you're seeing here is the code tag. And this is what we reviewed in the browser just a minute ago. This is what's causing that particular bit of text, again, the element content text between it, to be that font type that looks more like Courier or like an old computer, typewriter text type font. Next tag is the first kind of new one that's creating the text link. So this is an A tag, anchor text tag. The difference here you're seeing, of course, is you're not seeing just the A wrapped immediately in angle brackets. Each A tag needs at least some amount of attributes, and the attribute that it has to have is this one right here, href, the hypertext, right, or hyperlink reference. Basically, it's saying if the user clicks this bit of text, where am I supposed to take them? This could be somewhere on your page, like taking them to the top or the bottom of your page. It could also be obviously taking them to another page of your site, keeping them on your domain but taking them to another page, or it could be taking them to a completely different website altogether. For example, if I were to want to take them to Google, I could type in the full URL path starting with the http:// and now this new because of the newly added URL, clicking this link would immediately take the visitor to Google. Also note that initially I think it was set with just a pound sign, a number sign. This is generally used by web designers and developers as what's referred to just as a placeholder. It will cause the link to be live. In other words, you can see it styled with the blue underline, but it doesn't actually, it's not actually going to do anything, except that typically in most browsers, it's going to, if you clicked it, it would take you to the top of the page. It's not really meant to do that. There's better code to do that, to take someone to the top of the page, but that's typically what it's there for. So if you see, you buy a website template and you see all the links, all the A tags are use this number sign or the pound symbol, you'll know why. It's basically just a reminder to you that you need to go back and update any of the links to actually point your visitors where you want them to go. So just note the A tag is just a little bit, it's our first one that's a little bit unique. The opening tag is this entire bit. At the very minimum, it includes the less than sign, the A, href for href equals, and then in quotation marks, the actual web page or URL that you want to take the visitor to, okay? Now, the text that goes between it, which is here, is what's going to be linked. This becomes the linkable text, and this closing A tag says, okay, that's the end of this text link, all right? Lastly, it says this is the end of this particular paragraph. So we get to heading level 2. We don't need to talk about that. We already understand that. The next is an ordered list, just OL. Ordered lists, again, by default, unless you add some additional code, ordered lists are going to be created numerically. So you have an opening ordered list tag, and then down here you say, look, I'm done with my ordered list. What comes between the ordered list tags now is these list items, LI. So each LI is basically stating that this is one list item. In other words, use this bit of text and cause it to be number 1, and then this list item, use it to be content number 2. Notice that list items are treated a little bit like a block level element in that they'll automatically do a hard return, but they don't necessarily put all that much space between them. Just something to note. The list items won't be 1 and then on the same line 2. It'll force the next list item down to a row. So if we wanted to copy this just for testing purposes, and we wanted to add a new one, if I just paste it, now instead of just 1 and 2, we're going to, when we refresh the browser, we're going to see 1, 2, and 3. Next is block quote. The block quote tag is used whenever you're going to actually quote someone, and it's typically for longer quotes, quotes that are somewhat sizable. There's also another tag, which is Q. See that over here in Edit Plus, for short quotes, quotes that are really just kind of short. Our better style with Q, semantically, defined as Q rather than block quote. This HTML that we got from HTML Ipsum, they're having block quote and then they've got a paragraph inside of it. This is really not necessary. The block quote by itself is a block level element that will cause space to show up above it, below it, and again, like I said before, it's going to cause extra space. It's going to be indented in basically on the left and pushed in on the right as well. It's not that this is wrong, but you just know that you don't have to have a paragraph right after the block quote. We could get rid of these, and this would work right here just fine. I'll go ahead and save it that way so you can see. Heading level 3, we won't need to discuss, just a smaller heading. Next, we have an unordered list, a UL instead of an OL. The unordered list, again, it's opened up here and closed down here, basically creates a bulleted list, a list that's not necessarily ordered numerically, but just has bullet symbols. By default, it's going to use a colored in circle, what's referred to in HTML or CSS speak as the disk. Again, we have list items, open and closing LI tags. And again, if I were to copy one of these and paste it again, we would end up with 3 bullets as opposed to 2. Lastly, on this page, I told you that we had the code tag, and we also, in this case, we're using it in conjunction with the pre tag. So here's the code tag, and of course, here's the opening pre tag, and here's the closing pre tag. Okay, this is really good training for a couple of reasons. This is basically, it's not really our first nested tag, but it gives us our best understanding of what tag nesting is, basically tags within tags. In HTML 4.01 and some of the other HTMLs, you could sometimes get away with improper nesting. Sometimes the browsers would display them properly, even though you had technically coded it wrong. So here's what I mean. Right now, this is coded properly. The pre-tag is the first, and the pre-tag is the last. And inside of that, we have the code tag opened and closed. How I like to teach this basically is this. If you start from the innermost tag and you highlight it with your cursor, when you keep going, the next tag you get to should correspond. So we started on the tag that was inside of pre. We have the closing code tag, and we kept going. Hey, guess what? We got to the code tag. That's correct. This is correctly nested. If, however, we reversed these two, I'm going to get rid of this one. I'm going to put it before code. This would be improper nesting. Again, if we start from the tag on the inside, we have closed pre, and now we have to open code. This is not correct. In HTML, it is possible that this would define or display exactly as it does right now. It may not cause any visual problem at all in HTML. However, in XHTML and in HTML5, this will definitely break stuff. Both XHTML and HTML5 require what they call proper nesting of tags. The code basically has to be better thought out and cleaner in order for it to work properly. So just pay attention. If you ever run into problems, you might want to just go back and double check anytime you have basically a tag within a tag, or what's referred to as nested tags, that your tags are properly nested. And again, like I said, the easiest way for me to teach that is just to start with the innermost and make sure that it corresponds, and then start with the second, make sure it's next. If you had a third, if this was all wrapped in another tag, you could just continue the process out to make sure that it was nested properly. So here's what's happening here. The code tag is making this this content it's making it to be that courier type or that typewriter type font face. That's what it's doing. The pre-tag, which again is short for pre-formatted, is doing something altogether different. What it's doing is allowing us to keep this additional spacing. You see how each one of these, what's referred to in CSS as declarations, each one of these is basically pushed to the right. There's spacing over here. If we didn't have the pre-tag, it wouldn't allow this. Everything would be different. And I'm going to show you that here in just a second. But let's go back and take a look at the page as it is now. We'll refresh. And you'll see that we have an additional number 3 item added to both the ordered list and the unordered list down here. But let's pay attention, and the block quote still had the same space before it and after it, no change with removal of that paragraph tag. But check out this, check out the spacing that's happening here. This is happening because of the pre-formatted text. So if you ever had text that you wanted to display, typically in regards to computer code, although there are other uses for it, you could use the pre-formatted tag or the pre-tag in order to get away with this layout. But it's not a crutch. Don't use pre-format to try to pull something off just because you can't figure out how to do it otherwise. That's not good usage of the tag. Let's go back and take a quick peek at it. If we took off the pre-tag altogether and we just left this wrapped with the code tag, just want to show you what would happen. Go ahead and save that. We'll refresh the page. And now you see that the code still outputs. It's still in the same typewriter type font face, but it is now on one line. And that's because without the pre-tag, that's the proper output for it. None of the line breaks or the returns matter to HTML, and that brings up another thing I want to point out. If you have a bunch of space, and I'm going to the very first paragraph after the first word, I'm going to put a bunch of spaces here, a whole bunch so you can see them. This is not going to matter to the browser whatsoever. It's going to act as if that's one space. Similarly, if I were to put some hard returns here, it's not going to pick this up, this extra line bit here. It's not going to pick it up. It's going to use it exactly as I just defined. Similarly, maybe if I do show you this, okay, so now we've got some really weird stuff going on. Basically put hard returns here in regards to just a couple or a few words. This is going to output in the browser exactly as it is right now. There won't be any change. We will not see additional spacing here, and we will not see these hard returns, etc. It's going to recognize the opening, closing paragraph tags. Everything that happens between it basically isn't going to change whatsoever. So
You add, oh, okay, just show that.
So there we go. I've saved it and I refresh it and we get no change. It's exactly the way it was. So just that's one thing I think that confuses a lot of people is they start seeing or thinking rather, oh, I want more space. Let me add a couple of spaces here, or I want to create a new paragraph with some extra space, and they try to basically do it just by adding it into their actual HTML code, and the browser will ignore all of it. You want to say something, Jerry?
Yeah, somebody asked about the spacing between like the elements, the line spacing itself. So like between
line spacing here?
Oh no, between like the H1 and the paragraph. Like you have line 11, that's just a blank line.
Okay.
If you were to put more in there, would that do this?
Gotcha. No, this is just for the web designer to try to keep things a little bit organized. Yeah, this doesn't change anything. So if the question was, will this change anything? The answer is no. This will render exactly the same way as the page is now. So I've saved it and I'll refresh and you'll see that we get we get no change. So that's a great question. So same thing. It just becomes a little bit harder to try to figure out what's going on. If you have it this way, there's nothing wrong. If you can look at your web pages and understand them perfectly well, all bunched together, then more power to you. It's absolutely fine. But for me, I do try to keep typically some spacing similar to this. But again, we grabbed this code from another website that had this pre-formatted this way. Yeah, Jerry.
Somebody asked about how does it know the difference between spaces between words? How does it recognize that there is a space? If when you added a whole bunch, they ignored it.
Basically, it expects that it's going. Well, it recognizes one. That's the answer. It recognizes one space. So if you do use the space bar once, it will recognize it. If you use it more than once, it will disregard it altogether and treat it as if you've used it once. Now, having said that, there is something called a non-breaking space. I don't know that I was planning on talking about that, but that's okay. This is something we'll get into a little bit later, but it's called HTML entities. An HTML entity is kind of a weird code, if you will, to cause certain things to happen. Here's one example of an HTML entity: the ampersand symbol, COPY semicolon. So this is an HTML entity, and one of the cool things about Edit Plus, you'll notice, is that when I completed it, it turned to a different color. Even right here with the ampersand symbol COPY, it's still black. As soon as I put the semicolon, which is the end of this entity, you'll see that it styles it with this kind of a teal green color. It's giving me basically information that I've done it correctly. So this HTML entity would cause the copyright symbol to be output, because inside of HTML there are certain characters basically that are not necessarily recognized by HTML. The copyright symbol is one of them. Actually, quotation marks are another. It will work in most browsers, but if I wanted to put quotation marks around, let's say, ipsum dolor, you'll see that I've just typed in regular quotation marks, and it may work fine, but this is technically not accurate. The quotation mark is not a proper HTML character. You're supposed to use the HTML entity that corresponds with the quotation mark, which is ampersand QUOT semicolon. You can see again that it's told me, hey, you got it right. And this is not like an opening and a closing. It's the same exact thing. So now if I used and QUOT, short for quote, semicolon, it would cause this bit of text to have quotation marks wrapped around it. Again, if you just put straight quotation marks in HTML, most browsers will probably display it properly, but it's not technically correct. Now, we started this by someone asking about spaces. NBSP semicolon stands for non-breaking space, and this basically forced the browser to add an additional space in addition to the one that it was going to pick up anyway. So if I wanted to add a number of spaces in this line, I could copy the non-breaking space HTML entity and add it 4 times. Now it's going to end up with 5 spaces after that first word in the first paragraph. So now you can see that we have additional space that's showing up. And if we look at lorem ipsum right down here, ipsum dolor, you'll see that we have quotation marks wrapped around this text, even though we didn't technically type quotation marks at all. We actually used the HTML entity, the proper HTML entity for quotation marks. All right. I think that's pretty much it just for the basic understanding of HTML. I want to talk real quickly in just a few minutes time a little bit about CSS, and then we're going to take some questions. So down here, thankfully, with the code that we got from HTML Ipsum, we've got a little block of CSS. That's what this is. And I'm going to get rid of that. I don't really want it to be that complex just yet. And I'm actually going to get rid of this, and I'm going to change it to H1, just so you can kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about. In CSS speak, there's kind of two parts to defining CSS. CSS, again, basically stands for Cascading Style Sheets. All you need to know is it's what is used to style content a particular way. It's also used for layouts or to position elements in certain places. There are different ways to do this, and we'll definitely be building up your chops as we go along. But this is saying, this is what's called a tag selector. And again, I just said there's two elements to CSS. There's the selector, and then there's declarations. And you can have just one declaration, or in this case, we have 3. Okay, each one of these is a declaration. This is the selector. Inside of the declarations are what's called properties and values. The first part is the property. You can see that after the property is a colon, and the value comes after the property, and behind each property is the semicolon. Okay, so this is the proper flow of CSS. Note that the entire declaration block, in this case these 3 declarations, are wrapped in these curly brackets, curly braces also referred to. There is this opening, or this one that has the little point to the left, and the closing, the one that has the little point to the right. This could also be written differently. Don't think that all CSS has to look exactly like this and have this kind of space, etc. This is actually the way I do code mine personally. This is the way I prefer, the way I was taught, but it doesn't have to look like that. For example, it could look like this. Again, the selector, what are we going to select? We're going to style the H1 tags. That's what this is saying. And then the next thing you can do is just type the curly brackets one after the other is typically a good regimen, because that way you make sure that you have both. And then in between you could say color colon blue semicolon. This is a complete bit of CSS. All on one line, contains everything that we just spoke of. It has a selector. It has a singular declaration, in this case just 1 rather than the 3. It has a property, and after it is the colon. It has a value, which is blue, and the semicolon, again, all of it wrapped in the curly brackets. This is absolutely positively proper. There's nothing wrong with this. Personally, I like to put a space between my properties and my values, similar to how it's done up here. But there's nothing wrong with this altogether. This works just fine. So just pay attention to that. We'll get more into CSS. I just want to give you a basic understanding of selectors and declarations. And while we're going to use it to style just a teeny bit on this page, consider this part of the training done, and then take some questions. So with that, I'm going to just get rid of this block altogether. We don't need it. Save the page. We'll scroll back up, and I want to show you something. There are 3 different ways to use CSS to style your pages. The first is what's called inline CSS. The second is called internal CSS, and the third is called external CSS. The best route to take, generally speaking, is external, meaning that you have an external style sheet. You've probably seen web pages that were built and they had a file named style.css, very common with WordPress. Actually, with every WordPress installation, you're going to have a style.css file. If you see that, you know that the page is using external CSS, meaning that the CSS code is placed on an external or a separate page. We're not going to get into external CSS today. We will, but not today. I do want to show you just real quickly inline CSS and also internal CSS, and just talk about the differences and the benefits and drawbacks of each. So right here on this page, we've got the heading 1 tag, and again, it's this text here, HTML Ipsum presents. We'll go have another quick peek of the page in the browser, and we'll see that we have this text is, again, it's the default, and it's in black. Okay, so what we're going to do is change the color to red. When you are doing inline CSS, which is what I'm demonstrating to you now, the way it's written is slightly different than when you're writing either internal or external CSS, and you'll see what I mean here in a second. It'll be more clear after we get done. If I want to cause this text to be read through CSS and I want to use inline CSS, here's how it's done. I simply type the word style. You can see it became red by Edit Plus, equals, and then I type quotation marks. I want a value, or basically the part of the CSS that we talked about before, the property and its value, goes between the quotation marks. So when you want to style the color of text, you simply used the property color. And I put the colon, and I'm going to use, I don't know, we'll use blue. There are many different ways to set the values for a color. You've probably seen hexadecimal stuff where it's, the pound sign, FFF, or 6 Fs, or zeros for black, etc. But you can also use some predefined words. There's a number of standard words that most browsers understand and will replicate. Blue is just one of them. So again, all we've done is, instead of just the opening H1 tag, we've now added a new attribute to it, the style attribute. So style equals, and then in quotes, and then we've added a particular property. In this case, we want to define the color, and we've set the value to blue, exactly as we followed before. But note that we don't have the curly braces. Those don't show up in inline CSS, nor do you have to have a selector. The selector is assumed because it's inside of the H1 tag. Okay, so this is a complete example of inline CSS. Go back to the browser, we refresh, we're going to see that top heading 1 text become blue, and we do. Okay, so now here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to change this heading to a heading level 2 real quick, show you the internal CSS example, and then we'll take your questions. So going back to the document, I'm going to change this to a header level 2, heading level 2. I'm going to do that not just by changing the text, but actually by changing the tag. Changing the text between wouldn't have changed anything other than just the displayed text. So now we have 2 heading 2s. And I did that for a reason. I want to show you that even inline CSS is much more powerful than, I'm sorry, internal CSS is much more powerful than inline. I really wouldn't recommend that you use inline CSS, except for just playing around and testing with it, because it's really inefficient. In internal CSS, here's how it works. The first thing you need to know is you have to set the definitions for the styles inside of the head area. It has to come up in this area here between the opening and closing head tags. So I'm going to put my cursor over here. I'm going to give it some space, and I'm going to come up about right there, and I'm going to type style, and then style again. Oops. So we have the opening and closing style tags. This is new. And again, these style tags must be contained within the head tags, between the opening and closing head tags. If I put this lower on the page or somewhere else, it's not going to work. The next thing is, even though this will probably work, it's really not complete. At minimum, you need one attribute set for style, and that is the attribute type. You see how it turned red again. Type equals, in quotes, again, remember that these attributes, basically you have the property of the attribute equals, and then in quotes, the actual value setting. And we're going to type the words text / CSS. All this is basically telling the browser is that the styles or the codes that's going to come between here, it should define them as they're basically, it's text to be styled or used as CSS styles. Okay, so this is really easy, but just understand that you want to use at minimum this one attribute if you're going to do a internal style. So now what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to go back to the other version of the layout of CSS that we just defined earlier, and we're going to use the selector as H2. So basically what I'm telling the browser is when you encounter an H2, now we have two of them on the page, here's what I want you to do. We're going to space and then put in the opening and closing curly brackets, and I'm going to simply type in between here color : red semicolon. Again, this is now a complete CSS statement. Selector, property and its value, contained the declaration itself, which the declaration is this entire bit, contained in the curly braces. I'll save that. Here's the power of CSS and internal CSS. I only had to do it once, but now we have these two heading level 2s, and these will change in a second. They'll both become the same size, and they're both going to become red. Okay? They're both the same size because now they're both heading 2s, and they're both red because we have just told the browser, and anytime you encounter this H2, color it red. And because now we have two of them, it would be red. The cool thing about this is it makes our styling really efficient, because anytime we add another heading 2 now, you can see automatically, just by doing that, we don't have to add any specific code here. There's no additional attribute code like we had to do or use when we were using the inline. Because it's predefined up here, it says anytime you encounter an H2, just make it red. So whether we used 1 on the page or 22 on the page, it wouldn't matter. Immediately, it's going to become red. So with that, Jerry, I am done with today's presentation. You can hit me up with any questions you want.
One quick